Hello, everyone, and welcome back to a little snippet presentation by me, yours truly, Lizz Noble, on the topic of podcasting. So thank you so much to Toastmasters and Melanie for asking for me to do a short little presentation on podcasting. It's one of my passions. I have got into podcasting very early on as somebody who is really fascinated by documenting things and having audio kind of interviews. And I was a fan of the radio, back in the day. So podcasting has been a wonderful space with little rules that I feel people can really carve out a corner for themselves to be noticed, to share their thoughts, much like blogging. You can basically start a podcast on many different topics. But right now, what we're going to be focusing on is actually looking at podcasting and some of the technical elements, just a light, high overview of technical elements. So I have my slideshow up here. I'm going to speak to you today about podcasting. And of course, once again, thank you so much to Melanie and to Toastmasters for having me. I want to speak about something called a DAW, and that probably already makes people's eyes go a little wide going, oh, I already don't understand. But don't worry, don't fear. Podcasting can be very easy and it can be relatively low cost as well. But it is a really good way to develop followers, to get some content out there. We can't fight the notion and the fact that content is king. So if maybe blogging's not your thing, or it is, and you also want to make a podcast, or social media isn't working out, or TikTok's not your vibe, then we look here at something called podcasting. And of course, you've had a discussion with Melanie already on that. But this technical kind of side here is more about how we get our podcast out into the world. How do we edit and workflow? So digital audio workstations or digital audio workspaces, there's a variety of them. People might call them a DAW, but digital audio workstations or spaces are basically programs. They're just an audio program that anybody can access. And there are a variety of free ones. For example, Audacity, which is a downloadable program, as well as something called GarageBand, which you can get on a variety of devices, but typically this is more Mac specific. There's also more technical and very intense programming that are in depth, that are costly. For example, one is called Reaper, another one's called Adobe Audition. There's several out there. There's lots that you can choose from. It really is about what maybe budget-wise you're set up to do and how comfortable you are with technology and programs like this. So Audacity and GarageBand, I'm kind of highlighting those because they're very user-friendly. They're simple. You probably wouldn't want to score an entire sort of film on one of those stations or workspaces, but you would be looking at these if you are somebody who's new to audio editing or editing at all. And you would also want to access some tutorials on this. So depending on what your learning style is, Audacity and GarageBand have been around for a while, and there are very detailed tutorial videos from the makers of these programs, but also people, just the regular folks out there on the internet, posting YouTube videos, for example, walking you through how to do things like importing a file, exporting a file, things that are quite daunting to individuals who are starting this kind of project, but are all very easy when you get down to it. It's sort of like attaching something to an email, for example, if you're going to upload a picture of yourself or a document. The same sort of idea is in and around uploading an audio file to a workstation and downloading it or exporting it when you're finished. So right off the bat, I would suggest something like Audacity or GarageBand to immerse yourself into, source some tutorials out on YouTube, or download the programs and just get right into it. So more technical and in-depth stations or workspaces, like I mentioned, Reaper and Audition, they require cost. You need to pay for these. And I wouldn't really suggest getting into this until you're maybe doing some more in-depth work or you're getting quite serious about audio editing. So it doesn't have to be complex. Simplicity is key when it comes to doing something like a podcast. If you are looking to make a journalistic style podcast with lots of research and guests and tons of audio and transitions and music, you probably need to do a lot more tutorial sourcing and education for yourself in that way, unless this kind of stuff comes naturally to you. But what I find the best way to approach this is through simplicity. And that's going to lie heavily within your recording. Because if you are somebody who maybe hadn't planned ahead for the podcast, or there's lots of stopping and starting, or perhaps people are fiddling with things and making noises, this is going to create a real difficult audio file for you to work with in terms of when you import it in a digital audio workspace or station. You're going to have trouble trying to cut around all the noise or problems. So it's key to be prepared. Get your questions together. Don't feel too nervous, because yes, there is editing, but you want to make editing easy on yourself. So coming prepared to the interview with your guest or your co-host is really the key to making editing not so much of a headache. So when I get files from my clients and they have prepared, they've found a quiet space to record in, they've turned off their phones, they've reminded their co-host and their guests to do the same, my job's relatively easy. It's not a big deal to go in there and trim things up, listen for any idiosyncrasies that need to be addressed, and get that file out. So prepare, but simple is best. So now we're going to get into an editing workflow. So essentially, a workflow is just a list of or itemized pieces to a project, right? So that's something used largely. You hear workflow thrown around a lot in my industry in podcasting and filmmaking and media, because workflow is very important. We want to make sure that this is clear. We know step 1, 2, 3, and 4, and so on. So when you record your podcast, you can use a digital workspace or workstation to do this. You can record directly onto Audacity. You can record directly onto Audition or Reaper or GarageBand. So where it becomes sort of difficult is your microphone choice. Microphones can be quite costly, and they can be a little bit complex when it in terms of having to set your workspace up with a mixer, for example, or something that's going to actually transfer the audio into your computer. What I suggest for first-time podcasters or people who are just looking to make this an easy process, they're not looking to do anything super complex with their audio, is a USB input microphone. So this is very much a plug and play kind of microphone, meaning you plug it in, and typically these kinds of microphones will be recognized by Audacity or GarageBand very quickly. And you can essentially play with the knobs that are on a USB microphone to adjust the volume at which your voice is coming into the program. And you'd have to play around with this. Every microphone is different. Every workstation and how it talks and relates to that microphone will be a little different. So testing will be needed. I wouldn't suggest buying a microphone, taking it out of a box, and just plugging it right in and, just doing your first episode that way. I would suggest you try these kinds of technologies out before you enter into your planning phase, getting a co-host to record with you, or for example, a guest. So I would suggest a USB input microphone that is, like I mentioned, plug and play. There are several out there. You can source them off of a variety of different websites. Just keep your receipt. If it doesn't work out, you can return it. So you can also record your audio files via something like Zoom. You can get a good set of headphones with a decent microphone and record something with a guest or co-host or by yourself. Say you just want to put out your speeches as a Toastmaster extraordinaire, go right ahead and do that. You can create content that sounds good. It doesn't have to cost a lot of money. Content is king. Perfection takes time and energy and money, that's true. And we all want to aim for that really good quality audio. What I will say to you is that finding a quiet space, trying to limit things around you that make noise. Computer fans make a lot of noise sometimes, depending on the age of them. Don't sit next to your fridge in the kitchen. Your kitchen's going to be echoey. The fridge makes noises. As much as we think, oh, we're alone and it's quiet in the house, houses and buildings actually make quite a lot of noise. Air conditioner units coming on, heating units coming on, people yelling outside your window, or maybe there's ambulances going by if you're in Toronto. So the idea here is to really think about your recording space, do some tests. But if you don't have a lot available to you in terms of a budget, or maybe you're just doing this for fun or to test it out, find a quiet space to work in. You can get yourselves a typical earphone, microphone that you have on you, that you can, pardon me, plug into a computer that might have come with like a smartphone, but you're going to have to run tests, see what works for you, but you do have to concentrate on getting the best quality audio you can, because I'll tell you this, from a filmmaking standpoint, from an audio standpoint, people will check out and they will get very disconnected when audio starts to sound bad. So when you have people doing this or crunkling papers or typing, it's going to distract people. So it's very important to find your workflow, where the quiet space in your home or your office might be, wherever you're recording this, and actually make it work for you. Don't get discouraged too much by that. There's ways that you can combat this. You can turn things off. You can, close your window and, maybe turn the AC off just for a little bit so you don't get that sound. There are ways that you can tailor your space to accommodate for your recording, but run tests. Just do a couple of things that maybe can help see, and you can run some tests to understand if you're getting good quality. So after you've done that, maybe you've recorded your audio with your first episode with a friend or a guest or a co-host. You have it on your computer if you have recorded through your digital audio workspace, or maybe you've recorded it in a different way through Zoom perhaps, and you have scheduled a meeting on Zoom, pressed record to this computer. You can take that audio file from your call and you can take that and import, which just essentially is, like I mentioned, attaching a file. You'd launch your Audacity program or launch your GarageBand or Adobe program. And it's very simple in terms of a file import, and you choose your file and it'll populate within your workspace. So that's going to be something that you see right in front of you. The audio file will pop in and you can actually start to get cutting. And what you want to cut out are those things like maybe there's a countdown before the audio begins. Maybe somebody coughed and made a noise. These kinds of things are very important to get rid of so that you have a smooth, clean track. Something that you can always do too is while recording, if somebody sneezes or somebody says, hold on a second, I've got someone knocking at my door, just pause and take that question again. If there's a big boom or loud sound, you're not live, right? That's what the beauty of this is you can say, actually, I'm going to put a pause on that. Let's start again. And you can say, so please tell me what your background is. You can begin asking questions again and make a note to yourself in your workflow that you can maybe scribble down that at 20 minutes into the interview, something occurred. So you can revisit it, or your editor can revisit it to extract it out of that sound file and make sure that it's a bit cleaner. So we're looking to clean up that kind of those sounds, things that don't work out. If you're recording over Zoom, sometimes there's lag, sometimes there's interference. It sometimes is something you don't have any control over, so you have to cut it out to make sure you got that audio as clean as possible. So keep your editing simple. Clean up your audio, get a good starting point where the intro to the podcast is clear and people can launch off into what they're talking about, and clean up the end of the podcast recording. So you can also source copyright-free music. That's just a quick Google. You can go onto a few different places, but YouTube also has a space called the Creator Studio, and you can access free copyright-free music that you can use for intro, outro music. If that's not your style and you just want to go right into talking, that's cool. But a little bit of, production value and music can really kind of frame a theme. It can give people, a feeling of hope, a feeling of dread, whatever your topic might be. You can really do a lot with music. We know music elicits emotion and response, right? So we can source this kind of music through copyright-free websites. Like I mentioned, YouTube Creator Studio is a great place to look for this, because essentially that's updated consistently. You have artists just putting their awesome tracks out there, and you can search by theme. So I would suggest getting something like that can become your theme music. You can put that in at the beginning and the end of your podcast. and you can end up exporting the audio file to MP3. You want to export at the highest quality that your workstation allows. An MP3 is a great way to do that. And then it's ready for you to share with the world. So we had our editing workflow we just talked about, and now we're going to talk about post-production workflow. So after you have your exported audio file, you've cleaned it up, you've put your intro and outro music in there, it's sounding great. You can test that on headphones, make sure it's sounding good. You export that file to your desktop, and now it's ready to be shared with the world. So you can use a platform called Anchor. This is a free Spotify-owned platform, and this assists with distribution. It also can basically make a website for you if you only want people just to find your podcast, for example, or you can embed all of your podcast episodes that populate once you upload them to Anchor onto your website. So you can take that, basically a website, embedded website code that has all of your podcast episodes there to listen, like a web player for audio. And you can take that code and send it off to your web developer, or if you're savvy, do it yourself. And you can have all of your episodes available on your website. So I would say that Anchor is the best free way to get your podcast out to the world. It'll automatically go onto platforms like Spotify, but you do have some additional things you need to check into for Google Pocket Podcasts, I believe for Apple iTunes, and a couple of other platforms. You need to sign in, make profiles to get your podcast out. But you can do that all through Anchor. So Anchor is anchor.fm. So anchor.fm, and you can make a profile for free on there, like I mentioned. Upload your audio file. There's space there to add any sort of logo or podcast art. And I would suggest you do this. You can use programs like Canva, which is a web-based graphic design program that you can actually design a logo on. And it is important to have an image available for your podcast, even if it's just a picture of yourself with some text, something, because people really will, it's like, not having a cover to your book, right? You do need to have that imagery there. And you can use a free graphic design site called Canva, CANVA.com, to produce these kinds of materials. And that sort of brings it into my next point, which is promotion. So that's all part of the podcast post-production workflow. You need to consider making social media posts, making a LinkedIn post, making Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, whatever you're on, whatever your brand is. You need to make sure to produce a social media graphic to share on your chosen social media platforms that also includes the link to your podcast so that people can find it. You might just be able to cultivate an amazing audience by just releasing your podcast, but a lot of times we need to tell people where those kinds of things are, right? So making a social media template, that's simple, that you can go in and edit every time you have episode 1 and 2 and 3. You can go in there and make sure to make a new one for every single one of your episodes. Doesn't have to be complex. You can have your colors picked out already, and you can put a picture of your guest or maybe just words that say just your topic. This kind of thing just allows people that opportunity to recognize your branding for your podcast. For example, if you've picked maybe text or color or logo out for your podcast, and it's just a simple thing you can share on your social media platforms to drive traffic. You want listeners, right? So making sure you're adding that social media graphic and giving a link to your Spotify, to the direct episode on Anchor, whatever way you feel like sharing it is the best way, because sharing is caring. So you can get people to your content. So it's also important to include the links to that podcast on things like a link tree or your blog or your website. Those kinds of things are going to help all of that SEO loveliness. And we want to make sure that we're really padding and adding to the clout of our online presence. If you choose to have a site, a presence on social media, maybe a blog, whatever it ends up being, you want to make sure all of these things work in a nice way where they're handing off the different links to each other. So you should mention that you have a blog when you're recording your podcast. You want to mention your podcast on your blog. So this is going to really help develop an online presence and to ensure that people are finding your content. So podcast production seems big and scary. This was a very high level overview, but there is lots of support online. You can find tons of tutorials on YouTube. And I would encourage you to reach out if you have any questions about podcasting. You can connect with me on LinkedIn at Liz Hodson Noble, and you can email me at Lizz Noble, Liz with 2 Z's, Lizz Noble .consultant@gmail.com. Thank you so much, everyone, for your time, and to Melanie and Toastmasters. I've really enjoyed these tiny sessions that I've spent with you. There's lots more to go over, but essentially I want to leave you with, don't be scared of content. You can make it. The answer's out there, information's out there. It's a friendly community, and it's a great place to get started in your social presence and building a brand for yourself. I can't wait to listen to your podcasts.